What's up, guys? We've covered some concepts of classes and using those classes to make objects, and now we're going to do it with some visuals. I think this helps because A, it's just nice, it's cute to see a little guy move around the screen, and it helps you have fun like it's a game. But also, even when I'm not doing stuff that's a game, even when I'm not doing stuff with visuals, let's say we got a user account class with name and ID number and email and stuff, I still kind of think of it as physical objects moving around in some space. So it helps to get that in your mind, and it'll help you even with stuff that doesn't work like that. So let me make a Pong game example, and I'm going to use something called Pygame, which is really fun and fairly easy to use, graphical and user input handler. So let's get one of these, and when you start a Pygame file in Code.hs, it has a ton of stuff already filled in, like a little example version. And if we hit run, it might work. Every once in a while it doesn't work, but let's see what happens. Okay, it gives us this text, and there's bouncing around. Whenever it hits the edge, it does two things. It changes direction and changes color. So let's look at the code to see how it does that. One thing I'm going to do is space it out. I really don't find it readable when it's all squished together. So let's do some of that. I haven't changed anything yet. Okay, so that's a little more spaced out, I think, in a nice way. The while loop right here, I'm going to change this to true instead of 1. It's the same meaning, but it's just kind of old-fashioned to use 1. While true means this is going to keep looping every frame. And how many frames? Well, we've set up a clock that's going to be 60. I'm going to move this outside of the loop. I think it's going to work either way, but slightly better. And what else we got? Events are things like button presses. If we have the user move the mouse or hit a key, or later they might use a controller button or something, those are going to be events. And we can eventually set up a nice thing, putting them in a queue and handling them. But right now the only one is like if they quit. If we close the window, then it can handle that. We've got this rect is a rectangle drawn around this text because it's sort of like a hitbox in a game, you know, where it's like what we see is not always what's calculating. It's calculating the rectangle and when it hits the sides, and we'll get to that in a minute. And it has an X velocity and a Y velocity. And then this is telling if you're hitting the left or right edge, it'll switch the X velocity, and then it'll go to some random color. And this font render is changing how our guy looks every time it hits an edge. And this is doing the same thing for if it bounces the top or bottom. It's changing the Y velocity, which is kind of hard to tell because they've just got it in a tuple with 0 and 1. And then every frame we have to refresh the display. It's going to fill in the background and then redraw our text. Okay. All this stuff at the top is setting up the dimensions, the resolution, and speed. I don't like the way they have this set up. We're going to change it, but that's like your X and Y velocity. And then screen, this is key. This is super important. Whenever we say screen, and we'll do that whenever we move stuff around or redraw things on the screen, it means that we've set up a surface at the very beginning that's going to be our background. Later we can have images and stuff and cool things for the background, but right now it's just solid black. The font, I'm going to delete this stuff because my thing that I'm going to show today, the Pong, is not going to use any text. So we're going to make it really simple, get all this out of here. And the colors, I'm going to just do black and white, so we're going to get that out of here. Try to make it nice and clean, you know. This is fine. I'm going to delete all of this because we're going to do it a different way. But it's nice that it starts with some example, you know. And then this, I'm going to move this outside of the loop because we're going to make the screen once and then we're going to keep it that way. This, we don't care. And this is super key. We're always going to have a display.flip at the end of our loop, which is like, hey, take all the stuff we've done, all the movements, calculations, inputs, and display.flip is like, okay, refresh that. Get our screen to show only the newest position of everything. And that's usually going to be at the end of our loop. So now we've got it to a nice, small, basic form that's going to handle what we add to it, which is a ball and a paddle. We're going to do Pong, remember. Now this means we're going to have some objects. We're going to do class ball, and we're going to have class paddle, and then they're going to have stuff in there that handles their attributes like coordinate, velocity, and their methods, which are things they do like move and bounce. So this is going to be similar looking to what we've done with our data, you know, have a class for a person and their name and email, but it's going to show up in a different way by having a little guy on screen instead of having a print. We're probably not going to use the word print at all in our Pygame. So let me get started here. Our ball is going to be doing the same stuff. It's going to be playing the same role as this text. So it's going to bounce around and hit the walls, and then later it's going to hit the paddle. So we're going to start the same way we've started all our classes so far with an init, and we're going to give it probably x and y. We can give it other things later like the velocity and stuff, but I'm just going to make the velocity kind of, you know, start with a default value. So when we create a ball, we're going to give it an x and a y, and then I'm going to say vx, which is like the x velocity, how far it's moving. I think that's easier to read than this when it had speed 0 and speed 1. I think that's kind of hard to glance at and tell what's what. But if we have vx and vy, I think that's, in my opinion, just nicer. And I just put whatever number there. We'll change it to something else soon. And the ball is also going to have something we'll use in a minute, which is the radius. We got to know how wide, you know, how big is it. Knowing the x and y is not quite enough to put it on screen. We've got to know how big is the circle that gets around those. And I'm just going to pick a number 20. I think that's fine, but we can always change it, you know. So this looks kind of like the init of a person or a rectangle or whatever we've tried recently with our exercises. And then for the paddle, I'm going to do something kind of similar. Well, we'll give it an x and y again. And we'll say, you know, maybe that's the corner. I don't know what the x and y will represent yet. We'll see what happens. And then obviously it's not going to have velocity in the same way because it's not moving on its own. It's going to move based on the player controls. And it's not going to have a radius because it's not a circle. It's going to have 2 dimensions, height and width. So I'm just going to make up some numbers, and then we'll change them later if they look weird. But guess what? We've got a problem. I am using width and height, and this doesn't clash with these in programming terms. Like, this is a different namespace, this is outside, but it's gonna clash in my brain. When I see these and I see this and I'm typing a method in the class for paddle, and if I ever use the word width, I'm gonna forget if I mean the width of this thing or the width of the whole screen. And I probably will have to combine those. So what I'm gonna do is use a concept that we've talked about a little, and that is the idea of a constant. A variable that doesn't vary, a variable that's just set. And the way to do constants in Python, or the way to signal that you're doing constants, is to make them all caps, to say, hey, this is important. Width and height are set in stone. You're not going to change the resolution during the game, you know? So if we ever need to talk about how big or how tall it is, we use that. And actually, I'm going to get rid of the size thing because even though it is kind of nice, I want these to be simple. I want this to have as few words as possible, as few variables as possible. And I'm going to cut the full screen thing too. That is complicated. We'll talk about it later. So now we're getting simpler in some ways. And if I ever want to use width or height, the all caps one means the whole window, and then the little ones are the little guys. Now, this is not doing anything yet. We haven't shown them on screen or moved them or any of that, but we're getting somewhere. So imagine that sometime before the loop, we're gonna create one of these guys. I'm gonna say ball, you know, later we might have multiples and they can be ball 1 or ball 2 or something, but I'm just gonna call it ball. And let's give it some X and Y. I'm gonna have it start, let's just have it start in the middle. Width over 2 and height over 2. Okay, we'll change that later. And then paddle is going to start on the right. So obviously in real Pong we'll have 2 paddles. But for now we're just going to start with 1, like a single player version. And this whole thing, by the way, is inspired or almost stolen from a guy named Isaac Triguero, who has this wonderful playlist on here, and I'll link to it in the description. And I'm taking a lot of his ideas, just changing them to fit with our circumstance and to fit with Code.hs and that kind of thing. And he does the same idea in his. We're going to have a paddle with, it's going to start on the end, so width would be like all the way over to the right, and then I'm going to say minus 20, so that's like almost all the way, you know. And then we'll go to the middle again, height over 2. Well, now that would be weird because they're overlapping. We don't want the ball and the paddle to start in the same place. So let's just have it start at the top. That's fine. It'll be ugly. We'll change it later. So when we have these guys up here on screen, it's not going to happen yet because we haven't told it. They're going to need to be drawn. And the way it works is that they get drawn every frame. So you put the ball on screen and it draws a little circle. And then it doesn't move it really, even though in our minds it looks like motion. It just completely erases it and then draws a new one in a slightly new spot the next frame, creating the illusion of movement. So what we're going to do is on these guys, I'm going to make a method called show and a method called hide. And that's going to be every frame it's going to show the ball, do some stuff, and then hide the ball to prepare for moving it. And that means we have to show it in, you know, white. We can make the foreground color white, and then it'll turn black before we redraw it white on a new spot. Let's do just the show at first and show that it's there, and then we'll talk about moving it. So Pygame has a thing called draw where it can do some shapes. We're going to do a circle, and for a circle you give it a couple arguments. You tell it where, and right now we only have one surface to draw on, that's the screen. And then you tell it the color, and let's define some colors. So let's say I'm going to say white, and this is all caps because it's going to be a constant that we use in multiple spaces, but it would be fine to do it lowercase. Pygame.color white. It has presets, like we could do the RGB, the 0 to 255 on the red, green, and blue, but Pygame has some presets, and we'll just go ahead and use it. And I'm going to say black. So this guy is white, and then what does it need for a circle? It needs to know the X and Y, center and then the radius. So the center is self.x and self.y. And I think we put parentheses around that. I don't remember. We'll see what happens. And then the radius. So self.radius. And this is going to draw. So let's see what happens if we put ball.show. No, we're not seeing it yet. Let's try one more time. Every once in a while it goofs up. Hey, there it is. There is our ball. It's a nice circle. It's 20 pixels in radius, which means it's 40 in diameter, and it's not doing anything yet. So let's give it some other methods. I would like to call, I'll call one move, because it's going to move. And it's going to say, we've got our coordinate, and they're going to change based on the velocity. This is going to be like, if we're going up, we'll move our position up. If we're going left, we'll move our position left. And we're going to say self.x plus equals vx. And then self.y plus equals vy. In some ways, that's like just the definition of velocity. If you want to get into it, there's really some calculus that makes it not as simple as it seems, but we'll talk about that when we do parabolas and like gravity and stuff. So this is going to move our guy based on these velocities, which we can start out with something and then it'll change when they bounce, just like the Pygame text did in that template. But we're making it more organized with the class structure, because then we can expand it later and add more balls and have them change the way they work, and etc. So what happens if I hit run now? Nothing, because I've never told it to do the move. So let's add one more method. I'm going to call this update. And here's the deal with that. I'm going to have the ball do certain things every frame. Every frame it's going to check if it bounces, check if it hits something, move a little bit, change direction if it has to, draw itself, all of those things. It's going to like have a list of things it has to do every frame. It's going to have its list of chores it has to do. And we don't want to call them up. We don't want to have our main function be like ball.move, ball.bounce, ball.show. We're going to have it just do it all in one. So this update is going to be like the master function that holds it all. And later we'll change that as it gets more interesting. But let's say self.hide is going to happen first, I think, and then move, and then bounce, which we haven't made yet, but of course it's going to happen because that's the key thing about a ball. And then self.show, and then let's add the bounce, even though it's not going to have any content yet. So now I'm going to say ball.update, and this means that our main function is not going to be cluttered. It's not going to have like 9 things to do. It's just going to say, hey, ball, do your thing, and then ball knows what its thing is because we're going to keep this organized. So right now it's going to be moving diagonally, I believe. This is a bit janky, and sometimes it, oh, look at that, beautiful. It is drawing itself over and over, and it's never hiding itself. We need to add the hide. So what I'm going to do is copy this, whoop, and just change the color. So it's going to draw itself onto nothingness. It's going to like disappear before it redraws. You know what I mean? It's going to move like that. Lovely. It looks a bit choppy right now, but we'll fix the frame rate or something when we get good. Now, that is great. Unfortunately, it gets off screen pretty soon. We haven't done any bounce stuff. So let's do that. Before we get the paddle, let's just make it bounce off the edges the way that the text did, the way that the DVD logo does, you know? We'll make it bounce off the edges, and then later we'll get the paddle involved. So the way we're going to do that is pretty ugly. It's going to look like sort of horrible math, because it is. All right, there's going to be a better way we'll learn later. But for now, we're just going to like test whether a certain point is at a certain spot, you know? So I'm going to write some comments to make it slightly clearer. We're going to say check for top and bottom. We're going to say check for left and right. And then we're going to say check for paddle. In the paddle part, we're going to leave blank. We'll add that later. We'll do the top and bottom and left and right. Okay. So left and right is easy. We'll say if self.x is less than 0. Is that right? Because self.x would be on the edge. Unfortunately, that's a tiny bit wrong because the x is the middle of the ball, and we don't want the middle of the ball to bounce. We want the edge of the ball. So I'm going to say minus self.radius. I told you this looked ugly. This is not the real way to do it. We'll learn a better way later, but for a quick and dirty template to get us started, this is fine. And then we're going to say, or we hit the right, so that was left. If self.x, which is the middle, shifted over a little bit to get the edge of the ball, is less than 0, meaning it's hit the outer reach of the window. Or the other way around, self.x plus self.radius is greater than width, whatever that is. Then we're going to go self.. We're going to say the velocity switches. So if it was going left, now it's right. If it was going right, now it's left. And that is vx goes to negative self.vx. So it works for switching either way. Like it bounces this wall, it's fine. If there's a diagonal component, then it'll switch just the horizontal part, and the y part will still be as it was, you know? So now we gotta check for top and bottom, and unfortunately this part is like so annoying because here's how it works. In Pygame, the x and y coordinates start here. So they start in the top left, meaning that if you're going x to the right, x is going up. But if you're going this way, then it's kind of like y is going down. Like 0 is something, 100 is something, 200, 300, etc. So when your y is going quote unquote up, it's really going down. And that takes a minute to get used to, and whenever you find yourself typing greater than or less than, you're going to switch it around. So don't worry. As I said, this isn't the real way to do it. We're going to find a nicer way to check for collision later, but just to get us started and write some simple stuff, we'll get something going. So we're going to go if self.y plus self.radius is greater than height. So that's going to be like if we hit the bottom, basically. Or self.y minus self.radius is less than 0. That's going to be if we hit the top. And then we're going to go, the self.vy switches to whatever it wasn't. And now if I hit run, it's going to do the little bouncy bit like text at the beginning, unless I messed it up. But why is it not moving? It is moving. It's just janky. See that? We can fix this bit in the background. You see how it's drawing over itself black and then drawing over itself white in the ways that are occasionally 1 pixel off? We're going to fix that, don't worry. But I would just want to show you like some super basic stuff where when your function is one line, it's so nice. And later when we have to clean it, that's okay too. But I want to show some really nice simple stuff. Okay. Now for the paddle, we want to make the paddle first. We don't want to type this and just hope it lines up. So let's leave that there. Right now the ball has everything it needs to bounce around, and the paddle can get a little more. Let's do some stuff here. So what does the paddle need to do? It doesn't move the same way the ball does, but regardless of how it moves, it still needs to do show and hide, right? Like each frame, if it's still where it is, no problem, but it's gonna move most of the time, so we're gonna delete it from the screen, move it, and then redraw it in its new spot. So I'm gonna go show and hide. And this is gonna be kind of like this one, except it's not a circle, it's a rectangle. And the rectangle has a slightly different setup, you know. Rectangles are a huge part of Pygame. All the hitboxes for your characters and stuff are rectangles, so we'll use them a lot more than we will circles. Now this is going to be pygame.draw. Instead of circle, we put rect, and then we put some parameters. It starts out just like the other one. You put where it is and what color it is, and then it needs rect with a capital R, which is a class. So it's creating an instance of a class, not like this one that we made, but one that's part of the Pygame setup for you. And when you create a rect, it needs where it is and how big it is. So we're going to give it the x and y, and we're going to give it the width and height. Literally just in that order. And a lot of people do these with parentheses, like you'll do x and y as a single package, and you'll do width and height as a package with parentheses around them, but it works either way. So I think we need one. No, we already got the 2 parentheses we need. And then I'm going to copy this, hoping that I did it right, and do it over here with the black. So this is like every frame we disappear, go to background, and then redraw it in a slightly new spot. Now, just like the other guy, we're going to have a couple more methods with how does it move and how does it consolidate all this stuff. So I'm going to go update. Just like the ball, I want to put these all in one. I don't want to have the main function say paddle hide, paddle move, paddle do some other stuff, paddle show. No, I'd rather just say paddle update, and then hey paddle, you take care of it. So it's going to do hide and then move, and then it doesn't have a bounce the way the ball did because we're controlling it. And that's it right now. That's it. All right, so we got to do a move because it's got to move, but other than that, we're pretty good. I'm going to say right now we'll leave it blank. And first we'll just try to get it to appear on the screen the way we did with the ball first. And maybe we're ready now. I don't remember. Let's see what happens. Yep, there it is. It's on the screen. It's a little, yeah, it's fine. So let's talk about moving it. Now we can move it in a couple ways. The video I'm going to link from Isaac Triguero talks about using the mouse, and it'll just follow your mouse position. And that's cool. I'm going to do the key so you can press keys to move it. Either one is great, and in fact, you can do both. You can just say, well, I'm going to let the user choose, you know. But I'm going to use the key stuff because that's going to be more common later, so we might as well start practicing it now. And so we're going to make a thing called key input using the Pygame get pressed. So it's going to tell us like what is currently being pressed, and then it'll call that key input, and we can use key input in the next few lines. Now in a bigger game, in a larger thing, we would not handle key inputs inside of a method, inside of a class. We would have the event queue as its own thing, and then it would tell the objects, hey, you need to move. But right here, we're trying to keep it simple. So we're going to say if key input is up, then you go up, and if it's down, you go down. So the name for up is k underscore up. And then we're going to say self.y goes down, let's say 3. I think 1 would be too slow. And then I'm going to cover this and go boop. And then I'm going to go down. And then remember the thing I said a minute ago where y starts at 0. So if you're going down, the number is going up. And it's a little hard to notice at first. But once these get wrapped up in methods, you don't actually see the numbers that often. You just say move up and it moves up. So now let's see what happens if we run. We're going to get a chance to move our little guy. Yep, and it's redrawing. Now it doesn't do much with the bounce. That bounced because it hit the edge, not because it hit the paddle. We can show you in a second. If I get completely off and don't touch it, it'll still bounce. Yeah, okay, so what we want to do is make it to where it doesn't. We want to make it to where it'll only bounce if it hits our guy. And we'll go flying past if it doesn't. Okay, so now all we have to do is add something right here. Now, collision is a huge thing in games, and I'm sure you guys know people talk about that, and they complain about hitboxes, and they occasionally clip through walls and speed runs or whatever. And this is a huge topic that we'll get into as much as you want, but for now I'm going to write something really simple. It's also really ugly, so don't worry. I know how bad it looks. But what we want to do is write something now that can get us going. And then later we'll use a nice, clear, organized way of doing it. So for example, it would be nice if we could ask the paddle, hey, am I overlapping you? And then it would send back true or false. And we could say, if true, then we bounce or whatever. But instead of writing another method, I've already done a lot. And I want to start us with something simple. I'm just going to do like this type of thing. Just say, are the numbers lining up? So I'm going to say if the x is matching the paddle and if the y is matching the paddle, then we must be overlapping. So I'm going to go this x plus radius means the right edge of the ball, like starting in the middle and going to the right. If it is paddle.x. Okay. Now again, this is not the clear, clean way to do it. You don't want to mention this object inside of this object because it gets a little muddled. But for the next 5 seconds, just bear with me. And then we want to say, and the y. So this is like if we're far enough over to hit the paddle, and then this is going to test if we're up or down in the right way to hit the paddle. And so I'm going to go, are you between the top and bottom? You know what I mean? Like, is the paddle y less than you, less than the bottom thing? And paddle dot y plus paddle dot height is giving you, you know, the corner plus the height will bring you down to the other corner. Again, I know that's ugly. And that means it's going to go horizontally. I guess we can do a separate one for if it hits the very top or bottom of the paddle, as that's like its own side in a way, but we'll get that. So now let's see what happened. Oh, wait. It is going to work, but it's also going to bounce no matter what. So let's take off this. That's the right edge, you know. So let's say, okay, is it going to bounce on our guy? Yes, it is. Now let's test if it goes past our guy. So right now it's bouncing on the 3 other sides, but on this 4th side, we want to see if it just flies past. Yeah, great. Test it one more time. Beautiful. Okay, so now we have a single player Pong game where you have to move the paddle and save it from going off the right edge. And the next step would, of course, be to add a paddle on the left. And to do that, we don't need much. We've already got the class, so we can just say like, you know, left paddle equals whatever, and it would almost be ready to go. This part wouldn't work because this part is horrible, but this part was horrible for many reasons, so that's okay. Use this as a starting point, and then we'll get into some cool stuff next time.